Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. Anyway, this lecture is on our next topic, first topic after your midterm. Oh, just a little aside with regards to that. Remember to post your narrative into the, into the correct field and don't include any attachments. And I look forward to reading those essays. And between now and the close of today, if you have any questions regarding that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Okay. Outside of that, I wish everyone a joyous holiday, and I hope again everyone is well. No one's ill. As you could see, I am just fine. Anyway, today's lecture is on cognitive theory and political psychology, which you've heard me mention in the past, is a dispositional view as opposed to a situational view. And as it relates to political psychology, the area of the application of cognitive theory asks and answers questions regarding how we make decisions and solve problems, except in a political context. And some of the questions that we would like to answer in this endeavor is, what mental processes shape our political reasoning, and how do we process information, and how does it relate to it? So how we acquire information is of paramount importance. And it flows from what we've accumulated over the many years in the cognitive sciences about how limiting memory is, some of which I've discussed in class. We have something called false memory syndrome. We also know that we have limited processing capacity, and some of the other things I'm going to describe in a very, very short period of time. But anyway, just backing up a little bit into the history, the first application of anything relating to cognition, to political psychology, occurred in the 60s with a growing popularity of cognitive consistency theory. Perhaps you've heard of it. Cognitive dissonance was promulgated by Festinger. And that concept is predicated on the premise that people act in ways contrary to their own beliefs. And with people acting in ways contrary to their own beliefs produces a state of psychological discomfort, a mismatch between behavior and our beliefs. Now, we all naturally try to reduce discomfort, which causes the individual to try and reduce what has come to be called as dissonance. Now, when faced with dissonance, that is the inconsistency between our beliefs and our behavior, do we change our behavior or do we change our belief? Well, as the model states, it is much easier to change the belief, especially after the behavior is produced. Some examples of cognitive dissonance is the rationalization that people engage in with regard to smoking behavior, which everyone knows has very, very unfavorable health effects. There's no question about that. And yet those, especially young people, who continue to smoke, reduce their dissonance by mitigating their health effects, and which would cause them to continue to smoke. Okay, and just one example of that. Now, we do have newer cognitive approaches, and one particular theoretical orientation comes from that which is called attribution theory. And there, much of the concepts were developed in social psychology and in the cognitive sciences. And if you look in your syllabus on the section regarding cognition, there are references, page references to some of the open source material in social psychology and cognitive psychology listed in there. So I strongly encourage you to review some of that material in those supplemental texts. In addition, you will find in the course documents section some somewhat entertaining videos illustrating some of the concepts that I'm going to come to describe. In particular, those regarding the availability heuristic and the representative heuristic, all of which I will describe in a few moments. Anyway, with regard to newer cognitive approaches, attribution theory, as I think I've already stated, draws from research in social psychology and the cognitive sciences. And instead of trying to constantly restore balance between beliefs and behavior, attribution theory is mainly concerned with uncovering causes of our own behavior and that of others. Now, as I have mentioned in the past, a prevailing popular view among people is that we approach things as naive scientists, analyzing all the information available to us, thus ending up with judgments which are largely based on rational analysis. We now know that this is not the case, simply because there is too much cognitive load. So let me talk about one very important concept. It's called fundamental attribution error. Simply stated, it is the deeply rooted influential cognitive mechanism in which we consistently attribute our own behaviors to external influences and factors, but we attribute the behavior of others to internal ones. Let me explain. Suppose you observe me walking across the room and I suddenly trip and fall. Fundamental attribution error predicts that you would first attribute my behavior to internal factors. Perhaps Professor J is clumsy and uncoordinated. However, if you experience the same event, that is, walking across the room and tripping under the exact same circumstances, you will attribute your behavior to any objects on the floor. Well, you get the point. We do this all the time, don't we? Right? You ever banged your head on something? You watch someone else bang their head or trip over something, you find it rather humorous. But when the same thing happens to you, you look at the source of the bang and say, like, what the heck was that doing there in the first place? And some of you might even get a bit litigious and say, you know something? I think maybe I have a lawsuit in my hands. I'm only kidding about that. Anyway, in politics, we can think of numerous examples of fundamental attribution error. One of the most frequently applied is regard to the George W. Bush and the Iraq War. Policymakers tend to infer that the actions of their own state were compelled by circumstances, even while they attribute the behavior of other states to the fundamental character of other nations in its leaders. In other words, always blame the other guy. If we do it ourselves, it's external factors. If others do exactly the same thing, it's internal factors. Anyway, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, some cognitive heuristics. There are two heuristics that are especially important in human decision making and reasoning that possibly contributes to the attribution error. One is the representative heuristic, which is a rule of thumb that a person will be of a particular kind by how similar he is to the stereotype of that kind of person. What I'm thinking of is, like, consider if I say Republican or Democrat or liberals, think of all the attributes that come to your mind with regard to those labels. The other significant heuristic is the availability one. And that's a cognitive gimmick in which we estimate the likelihood of something based on how available it is to us. Often, sometimes, what is available in memory is because it happened recently or it constituted a very vivid experience that we are unlikely to forget. Let me illustrate this, okay? I am thinking of a thing. This thing has fur, it has a tail, it has paws, and you take it for walks. What do you think I am talking about? I'll wait a moment or two. If dog came to your mind, that would have been correct, but it just as well could have been a cat. So why did dog come to mind instead of cat? Well, maybe cat came to mind if you are a cat owner, or your experiences of cats are much more available, much more frequent than your experiences of dogs, and of course, vice versa. So why did you say dog? Well, first, you absorbed each piece of information, the furs, the paws, etc. Then you compared these attributes to the default values that are stored in your memory system that corresponds to this. These are called schemas. What I just described to you is essentially a dog schema. We use this information to both categorize and to go beyond the information that is actually given. Which leads us to the concept of schemas. A schema is a kind of stereotype stored in memory that provides information on the typical features of an object, event, or person. These are basically generic collections of knowledge, general concepts, rules, lessons, and stereotypes stored in long-term memory. We use schemas to categorize newly encountered information and to make inferences that go beyond the information that is given. Think of it as a mental box containing typical default values or a template of the things you are familiar with. A schema is a well-organized structure of cognitions about some social entity, such as a person, group, role, or event. And these schemas will help to develop expectations about what to expect from others' behaviors. So here are some schemas that we have. A person schema. These are cognitive structures that describe personalities of others, and it can apply to specific individuals. For example, I say Barack Obama, or my sister, or I say such and such a person is an extrovert, such and such a person is a sociopath. And so when we suddenly are given these particular labels, a plethora of other associated ideas are brought forth to it, all growing from the cognitive structures that we have developed over from our memory exposures, etc. Another schema, it's called the self schema, and it's structures that organize our conception of our own qualities and characteristics. Then there's the role schema, and that indicates which attributes and behaviors are typical of persons occupying a particular role in a group. Well, for example, there's a schema regarding the attributes of a priest or a teacher or a nurse. Event schemas is another important one. These are, you may say, these are scripts about important recurring social events like weddings, funerals, graduations, and job interviews. Now, I suppose I can go on and on ad nauseum, describing all the various schemas that cognitive psychologists have developed over many of the years. But the important thing is, and I suppose if you want to explore it even further, read more in the cognitive and the social psychology text, or use the internet to drill a little further into these concepts, or quite simply, if you haven't done so already, take a course in cognitive psychology, which is offered here at Baruch, and it is a truly fascinating course. And the instructor who teaches that class is extraordinarily good, and I recommend it. I'm not dropping any names over here. So, but there's only one or two that teach it, other than myself, and I haven't taught it for a little while. The fact is that schemas are naturally occurring devices of mental economy, and that means, and this is the importance of recognizing these things, that they can mislead us on occasion, and especially in politics, erroneous judgments, of which there are very serious consequences. So clearly, it's relevant to elite decision making as well as the decisions that voters make. Look, we must always make decisions with only incomplete information about the situation at hand. That's what we've learned in the cognitive science over the years. And politicians can and do frequently make incorrect inferences by fitting individuals or events into the wrong categories or schemas. There's another concept that you may recall my mentioning in the beginning of this semester, and it's called analogical reasoning, which is a process that politicians frequently engage in, and it leads to erroneous decision making. Sure, I know we've talked a little bit, and you've certainly seen enough in terms of presentation with regard to group decision making, and in particular groupthink, and all that, of course, applies. But with regard to, I need to keep in mind, groupthink is a situational process arising from the dynamics of the group dynamics, and not paying attention to the operation of many of these dynamics and influences cause us to make erroneous group decision making. But with regard to analogical reasoning, we pivot in towards the individual and their reasoning capacities, or rather their reasoning capabilities. And it's essentially analogical reasoning, which is sort of kind of a heuristic, is reason by analogy. We compare a new situation to something similar we have faced in the past, or something that appears to be similar. And there are numerous historical analogies where analogical reasoning, and that is by applying something that has happened into the past to a current situation, has led to very, very bad decisions. And frequently cited are the 70s debate over American foreign policy. Some argue seems like a war between two historical analogies, and maybe you've heard something like, it is a mistake to fight the current war with the lessons of a previous war, stuff like that. Some say that the Vietnam War, aside from it suffering from a significant degree of groupthink problems, also may have suffered from analogical reasoning problems, comparing the Vietnam War with World War II, and there's not much more that I feel I really need to say at this point. And right now, this lecture is about 18 minutes and 23 seconds long. So I'm just going to close this particular lecture by saying generally that analogical reasoning tends to be used under conditions of high uncertainty and ambiguity. So if we're going to minimize the problems associated with analogical reasoning, it would, of course, be instructive to recognize conditions of uncertainty and ambiguity and all of that that entails. So I hope everyone, again, I hope everyone is okay. And we're now moving onto material for the latter part of this semester. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Look for material in the course documents section under a folder titled Cognition. This video clip will appear there, as well as also appear in a Professor J video folder, which is at the top of all of the folders in the course documents section. And we will continue from there. There's some interesting video clips embedded in there, and after several days, I will post the essay question that's associated with this lecture, as well as any of the video presentations that are included in that folder. All right, everyone. be well and stay healthy. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Okay? All right. Bye.